Good evening, friends, and welcome to Tucked In Tuesday. This week, we're going to read Chewy, Louie by Howie Schneider. Chewy, Louie is a very silly story about a puppy who tends to get into a lot of things at his new house. I hope you enjoy it. Chewy, Louie by Howie Schneider. One day, my father brought home a little black puppy. He was very cute and always hungry. We called him Chewy Louie. He ate everything we put in his bowl. Then he ate the bowl. My mother was very worried. "He'll get sick," she said. "He won't get sick," my father said. "He's just a puppy." Then we bought Louie a new bowl. That one didn't make him sick either. Louie slept with me in my bed at night, when he wasn't eating my toys. Louie ate my trains before they reached the station. Then he ate the station. My mother was very worried. My father said he would buy me a new set of trains. "He's just a puppy," he said. One day, Louie started to eat the back porch. My mother was horrified. My father was a little concerned too. "That's some puppy," he said. We decided to take Louie to a vet. The vet said to feed him more. "He's just a growing puppy," he said. Then he gave us the bill. That night, my father and mother sat down to figure out what to do. I was afraid they were going to give Louie away. My father hired a construction crew to repair the house. My birthday party was coming up soon, and my mother wanted the place to look nice. "What a cute puppy," said one of the workmen. They went inside to talk to my father about the job. Then they came back out and saw their truck. Then they quit the job. My father was furious. I thought he was really going to send Louie away this time. He decided to hire a trainer. The trainer arrived the next day and immediately went to work. So did Louie. Then my father had to hire another trainer. She brought a guitar along and sang songs to Louie about the error of his ways. I think Louie liked her songs very much, but he really loved her guitar. We didn't have any more time to worry about Louie now. My birthday party was tomorrow, and we all had to work hard to fix the place up. My mother wanted the party to be a big success. But instead, all her worst fears came true. Louie was horrible. I woke up the next morning feeling miserable. I knew now that we couldn't keep Louie. I decided to play one last game of fetch with him, although it really wasn't fetch. I just threw sticks and Louie ate them. But not today. Louie brought the stick back today. "Hey, Dad," I shouted, "look at Louie. He's not chewing anymore." Even my mother was impressed. Louie was changing. He was getting older and bigger every day. He didn't even eat my toys anymore. My mother still worried. "Do you think he stopped chewing for good?" she asked. "Of course," said my father. He's not a puppy anymore. The end. Chewy Louie was a funny puppy, wasn't he? I hope the dad's right and that he's done chewing on things and that their house can go back to normal. I know if that happened at my house, I think I'd go crazy. So this week we're also going to start something new. In addition to the book we just read, we're also going to start reading a chapter book. And I'm only going to read part of it each week, but I hope you enjoy it. We're going to start with The Chocolate Touch. The Chocolate Touch is a story that I enjoyed when I was young, and I think maybe even some of your parents have read it also. I'll tell you, this book was written in 1952, which was way before I was born, even before my mom and dad were born. So as I'm reading it, if you feel like there's a word you really don't understand or a phrase that you're maybe confused by, go ahead and press pause and have mom and dad explain it to you, okay? Because there are a couple parts where you're going to be like, I'm not sure what that word is. So here we go. The Chocolate Touch by Patrick Skeen Catling. I hope you enjoy it. Chapter 1. Most of the time, John Midas was a very nice boy. Every now and then, of course, he broke a rule, such as the rule against pretending to be a tiger when his sister Mary was supposed to be getting to sleep. Generally speaking, however, he was very well behaved. He should have behaved better. He lived in a comfortable house surrounded by a green lawn and wide-spreading shade trees that were suitable for climbing. His mother was gentle as well as practical. His father, when he didn't have to hurry to town, spent hours telling John interesting things about baseball, beetles, birds' nests, boats, briglands, and butterflies. John went to school and liked it. His teacher, Miss Plimsoll, was fairly easy to get along with, and as long as he did his careful work. He had received a new shiny golden trumpet, and his music lessons at school were going to be a present from his birthday. Mrs. Quaver, the music teacher, had soon agreed to let him play small parts, a few notes at a time, with the school orchestra. Finally, there was Susan Buttercup, who was in his class. Susan had soft yellow curls, round pink cheeks, blue eyes, and had one of the best collections of marbles in the neighborhood. John should have been completely well behaved, but he wasn't. He had one fault. He was a pig about candy. Boiled candy, cotton candy, licorice of all sorts, old-fashioned toffee, candied orange and lemon slices, Cracker Jack, jelly beans, fudge, black currant lozenges for ticklish throats, nougat, peppermint sticks, lollipops, marshmallows, and above all, chocolates. He devoured them all. While other boys and girls spent their money on model airplanes, magazines, skipping ropes, and pet lizards, John studied the candy counters. All his money went to candy, and all his candy went to himself. He never shared it. John Midas was candy mad. At lunch one Saturday, Mrs. Midas noticed a couple of little red spots on the end of John's nose. "Look," she said to Mr. Midas, "John has spots." Mr. Midas leaned forward to look at them. He gravely shook his head and clicked his tongue. John tried to look too, but it's very difficult to see the end of your own nose without a mirror unless you happen to be an elephant with a long nose that you can just bend down double. When John tried to look at the end of his nose, first with one eye and then with the other, and then with both together, all that he could see was a pink blur. Besides trying to look at something so close, it made his eyes ache. "I can't see any spots, Mother," John said. "Well, I can," Mr. Midas said. "Just because you don't see a thing doesn't always mean it isn't there. Try feeling the end of your nose with your finger." John rubbed his finger over the tip of his nose. Felt a little bit rough. "It may be the measles," Mrs. Midas said anxiously. She placed a hand on John's forehead to feel whether he was warmer than usual. "But I don't think he has a temperature," she decided. "I suspect John has been eating too much candy again," Mr. Midas said. "Have you been eating candy this morning, John?" "Some," John admitted. "What?" Mr. Midas asked. "Well," John replied, "well, I had a few cream delights. Susan gave them to me." "Anything else?" Mr. Midas asked. "A little toffee crunch," John said. "And what else?" Mr. Midas asked, beginning to look cross. John's ears grew red. He knew he wasn't supposed to eat candy before meals. "Oh, hardly anything else," he said. "John," Mr. Midas said, and his son recognized that tone. It meant that John had to tell everything. It turned out that John had been around to see most of his friends and managed to get candy from nearly all of them. The list he recited was a long one. "No wonder you have spots," Mr. Midas commented at last. "I think we better take John to see Dr. Cranium," he said to Mrs. Midas. Dr. Cranium was a tall, thin man with a bald head and a gray mustache. He looked through his glasses at John and said, he eats a lot of candy," Mr. Midas said. "He hasn't been eating his meals properly," Mrs. Midas said. "It's just what I thought," Dr. Cranium said. "I can tell by looking at him that he eats way too much candy already." The doctor shone a little electric light into John's right ear. Then he shone it into John's left ear. Then he shone it in John's nose. He told John to open wide and say, "Ah." Then he shone the light into John's mouth. "Much too much candy! Gracious me, he seems to be full of candy." He told John to sit down and relax. Then he picked up a small rubber-headed hammer and gave John a light tap on the right knee, just below the joint. John's foot gave a weak kick. John giggled. "It's nothing to laugh about," Mr. Midas said. "No, John," the doctor reproved him. "A healthy little boy who didn't eat too much candy would kick harder than that." "I'm sorry," John said politely, "but I can kick harder if you want me to." He gave a sudden high kick, which knocked the hammer out of Dr. Cranium's hand. It landed on its rubber head and bounced across the room. "John!" exclaimed Mrs. Midas. "I'm so sorry, Dr. Cranium." "John, tell the doctor you're sorry for kicking his hammer." I'm sorry I kicked your hammer, John said. I would recommend less candy, Dr. Cranium told Mr. and Mrs. Midas. An upset stomach can lead to all sorts of complications. On the way home, Mrs. Midas tried to explain to John what she thought the doctor meant by complications. You see, she said, if you put too much of one kind of food in your stomach and not enough kinds of others, it is bad for your whole body because different parts of your body need different kinds of food. Do you understand? I think so, John said. You've been eating so much sweet stuff, Mr. Midas added, that there isn't room for eggs and meat and milk and bread and spinach and apples and fish and bananas and all the other things you're supposed to have to make you grow big and strong. I like bananas, John said, especially thin sliced covered with chocolate. They're called banana surprises. Mr. Midas looked at Mrs. Midas, and Mrs. Midas looked at Mr. Midas. They both shrugged their shoulders. Sometimes it was hard to make John understand things. At home, while Mrs. Midas was busy in the kitchen, Mr. Midas continued to reason with John. You mean you'd rather eat candy than anything else, and chocolate rather than any other kind of candy, Mr. Midas asked. Yes, John assured him. Oh, yes. Don't you think there is a such thing as enough? Mr. Midas persisted. Don't you think that things are best in their place? I mean, don't you think there's a time for spaghetti and a time for roast beef and even a time for pickled herring and garlic toast, as well as time for chocolate? Or would you rather have chocolate all the time? Chocolate all the time, John replied emphatically. Chocolate's best, that's all. Other things are just food, but chocolate's chocolate. Chocolate. I think I understand, Mr. Midas broke in sharply. Very well. He took a deep breath and went on. John, he said, if you can't understand what sort of diet is really best for you, can't you at least get it into your head that you make your mother very unhappy when you eat so much candy that you can't eat anything else? The conversation always seemed to get around to the effect of John's candy eating on John's mother. John couldn't see how it could possibly do her any harm if he ate candy. He sat silent for a moment. Then he said, "May I go out and play? Please, Daddy?" Chapter 2. It was Sunday afternoon. The sun was sinking low in the sky, but the air was still quite warm. John was wandering along in the direction of Susan's house, absent-mindedly looking down at the sidewalk, when his eye was suddenly caught by a dully gleaming silvery gray coin lying right in his path. The coin was the size of a quarter, but even as he leaned forward eagerly to pick it up, John noticed there was something strange about it. He did not have a picture of George Washington or a picture of an eagle. On one side there was a picture of a fat little boy. On the other side there were the letters J.M., which was funny, John thought, because those letters happened to be his initials. Grasping the coin firmly, he ran toward Susan's house. He liked to collect things. He thought she'd be interested to know that he had the beginning of a coin collection. Although he was in the habit of going over to Susan's by the same route once or twice almost every day, this afternoon John found himself turning left where he usually turned right. I always go the same way, he thought. This time, I'll go for a change. I'm going a new way. He didn't stop to consider that you cannot go east by going west unless you go all the way around the world. Only 2 blocks along the unfamiliar street, John came to a small corner store. It was a neat red brick building with 2 big show windows. They were full of all sorts of candy. Susan was immediately, absolutely forgotten. John pressed his nose against one of the windows. He was imagining the taste of the chocolate-covered almonds and chocolate fudge on the other side of the glass when he noticed a man in a white apron standing behind the counter beckoning to him. John was surprised. He hadn't expected the store to be open on a Sunday. "Don't just stand there in the doorway, John," the man called heartily. "Come on in and get some fresh, sweet, creamy chocolate. There's a special sale today." How did the man know his name? John wondered. He couldn't remember having ever seen the store before. The storekeeper saw John hesitate. "The chocolate I use in my kitchen comes direct from the heart of Africa," he said. "I use none but the finest ingredients. And my recipes? Oh, well, I bet you've never had chocolate like mine before. Come on in." "Thank you," John replied, walking to the counter. "But you see, the trouble is, well—" "No money?" the storekeeper asked. "No money whatsoever? What's that you got there in your right hand?" John had forgotten the old coin in his hand. "Oh," he said, "well, this is part of my coin collection. I mean," he added more honestly, "I'm going to save this coin and get some more to make a collection." "Let me have a look at it," the storekeeper said. He looked briefly at the coin. "Ah," he exclaimed. "Is it any good?" John asked. His hopes were suddenly rising. "Very good," said the storekeeper. "In fact, it's the only kind of money I accept. But I don't suppose that you'd want to spend it on a whole box. I imagine you'd rather keep this for your coin collection than spend it on chocolate, wouldn't you?" "Oh, no," John said. "Chocolate any day." Go ahead then, help yourself, the storekeeper said, pointing to a heavily laden show table piled high with large cellophane-wrapped candy boxes, all exactly alike. You mean I can have one of these? John asked, his eyes round with surprise. The candy boxes were as big as the ones his father always brought home at Christmas time. Just help yourself, the storekeeper assured him. That is, unless you think it might be better to ask your mother first. She wouldn't mind, John said hastily and blushed. The storekeeper winked knowingly. I'm sure she won't, he agreed. Not in the long run, anyways. John tucked one large box under his arm, declined the storekeeper's offer to wrap it as a gift, thanked him, and hurried out of the store before there could be any question of anyone changing his mind. The storekeeper smiled as he watched his customer hurrying down the street. We're going to stop there. I wonder what's going to happen when John gets home and he opens up that new box of candy. So friends, I hope you've enjoyed Tucked In Tuesday this week. Next week we'll have a new story for you. We'll also read a couple more chapters in The Chocolate Touch, and I hope you get to find out what's going to happen to our friend John Midas. Have a good night.